Halloween, the night when the veil between the living and the dead is said to be at its thinnest. For children, it's a night of adventure, costumes, and the sweet promise of candy. For parents, it's a night of cautious fun, where the biggest concern might be too much sugar or a costume gone wrong. But in 1974, something far darker took place in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a real-life horror that forever changed the way families approached Halloween. This is the chilling true story of the night when Halloween candy became the deadliest trick of all. It's October 31st, 1974. The sun has just set in Deer Park, Texas, casting a cool glow over the neighborhood. The air smells of dried leaves. Carved pumpkins flicker on doorsteps, and excited children roam the streets, their plastic costumes rustling as they run from door to door. Houses are decorated with makeshift graveyards, hanging ghosts, and paper skeletons. But the scariest thing that night wasn't something anyone could see just yet, although it was hiding in plain sight. In one of those homes, a father carefully helps his son Timothy into his costume, a Planet of the Apes outfit that the boy had been eagerly waiting to show off. The father, a church deacon, a well-liked figure in the community, looked every bit the part of the caring dad, as he had volunteered to take a small group of neighborhood kids out for a night of trick-or-treating. It's a typical Halloween, filled with innocent excitement as the children race from door to door, filling their bags with candy. As they approach a darkened house on their block, the kids knock but receive no answer. Impatiently, they run ahead to the next home, leaving the parent a few steps behind. After a short moment, the father catches up, holding 5 long pixie stick tubes in his hands, smiling as he makes his way back up to the group. The man finally answered the door, he says, handing the brightly colored tubes to the kids. The kids hurriedly stuff the tubes into their bags, just another score in their growing treasure troves of candy. The night wears on, and eventually everyone returns home, tired but happy. It's been a perfect Halloween by all accounts. Later that evening, 8-year-old Timothy asks his father if he can eat just one more piece of candy before bed. The father agrees and reaches for the pixie stick, the same one that had come from the dark house they had visited earlier. Timothy eagerly tears it open and pours the powder into his mouth, only to grimace. He tells his dad that it's bitter, his face twisting in discomfort. His father brings him some Kool-Aid to wash it down and get the unpleasant taste from his son's mouth. Moments later, Timothy begins to complain of stomach pains. His face turns pale, and he starts vomiting violently before collapsing on the floor in convulsions. His parents panic and rush him to the hospital, but Timothy's condition deteriorates rapidly. Within an hour, the doctors deliver heartbreaking news. Timothy O'Brien has died. The family is in shock. The entire neighborhood is stunned. How could this happen? In the following days, the police launched a massive investigation. Halloween candy had been poisoned, something every parent feared but had never really expected to happen. The pixie stick had been laced with a fatal dose of cyanide, and it wasn't just Timothy's. 4 other children had also received the same deadly candy that night, although thankfully, none of the other children had opened and eaten them. A sense of dread swept through Deer Park and across the country as news spread. Parents scrambled to check their children's candy, throwing away bags full of treats in sheer terror. The idea that a random stranger could have poisoned a child's candy sent shivers down everyone's spine. But the reality was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. The police began scouring the neighborhood, questioning everyone who had handed out candy that night. They interviewed neighbors, searched for suspects, and tried to trace the source of the poisoned pixie sticks. But something just didn't add up. The father, who had handed the candy to his son, couldn't seem to remember exactly where it had come from. His story kept changing. First he said one house, then another, altering the description of who handed him the candy in the first place. As the investigation deepened, investigators made a chilling discovery. They found that no one had actually handed out pixie sticks in the neighborhood that night. It turned out that the dark house the father had identified, well, the homeowners weren't even home on Halloween night. The police became suspicious. How had this father returned with pixie sticks from a house that didn't give out candy? Under mounting pressure, more disturbing facts came to light. It turned out the father had recently taken out life insurance policies on both of his children. Policies that would pay out thousands of dollars in the event of their deaths. Then came the most damning evidence of all. Friends and coworkers came forward to tell investigators that the father had been asking around, inquiring about how much cyanide it would take to kill someone. He had even attempted to purchase cyanide from a chemical store just weeks before Halloween. As the puzzle pieces came together, the horrifying truth was revealed. This wasn't the work of a madman or some deranged stranger targeting random children. The father, who had led his and others' children through the streets on Halloween night, had poisoned his own son, hoping to collect the insurance money. His plan was to kill not only his son, but also other kids, to make it look like a case of widespread candy tampering. The community's shock turned to outrage. The father, Ronald O'Brien, was arrested and charged with murder. During his trial, the prosecution laid bare his cold-blooded motive and the chilling premeditation behind his actions. It ultimately took the jury less than an hour to find him guilty. Ronald O'Brien was sentenced to death and was executed by lethal injection a decade later. Ronald's terrible actions gave him the dubious nickname, one that he'll forever be known as, the Candyman, the man who turned Halloween into a nightmare for every parent. The story of Timothy O'Brien's murder is a terrifying reminder that sometimes the real monsters are the ones we trust the most. This tragedy sent shockwaves across the nation and changed the way parents viewed Halloween, with fears of poison candy persisting to this very day. The horror of that night still echoes, a chilling testament to how evil can hide behind the mask of normalcy. This story is one that left a small town reeling and parents questioning the safety of a night meant for innocent fun. The terrifying part of Halloween isn't always what lurks in the shadows. It can most certainly be what hides behind the most familiar of faces. In 1973, the town of Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, learned this lesson the hard way when one little girl's night of trick-or-treating turned into an absolute nightmare. This is the true story of 9-year-old Lisa French. It was Halloween night, 1973. The cool autumn air was alive with excitement as children, dressed in all manner of costumes, hurried from door to door, their laughter and footsteps echoing through the quiet streets. 9-year-old Lisa French, full of energy and anticipation, was among them, ready for an evening of trick-or-treating. Dressed as a hobo, complete with oversized clothes and makeup smudged on her face, Lisa carried a pillowcase to collect her candy as she set off on what was supposed to be a night of harmless fun. Lisa's plan was simple: stop by a few houses in her neighborhood, meet up with her friend, and be home by 7 p.m., just in time for dinner. Her mother, anticipating her daughter's quick return, sent her off with a smile, trusting that Lisa, like every year before, would come back with a bag full of candy and stories about her night. But as the hours ticked by, Lisa's mother grew anxious. It was well past her daughter's curfew, and there was no sign of her. Concern quickly turned to panic as she began to call friends and neighbors, desperately searching for any trace of her little girl. The streets, once filled with the cheerful sound of trick-or-treaters, were now eerily silent. By midnight, the police were called, and a frantic search began. The community came together in full force, combing the streets and nearby fields, hoping to find Lisa safe and sound. But as the hours turned into days, hope began to fade. There was no trace of Lisa, and no one had seen where she might have gone after visiting the last few houses. The entire town was on edge, wondering who could be responsible for the disappearance of a child on what was supposed to be a night of joy. 3 days later, on November 3rd, 1973, the worst possible outcome was realized. A farmer, driving along a rural road on the outskirts of town, made a grim discovery. A large garbage bag discarded in a field, and inside the bag was the lifeless body of Lisa French. The joy and innocence of Halloween had been shattered. The town was left in shock, and the question on everyone's mind was, who could have done this? The autopsy revealed the horrific details. Lisa had been sexually assaulted before being suffocated. The brutality of the crime was almost unimaginable. The police worked tirelessly, tracking every lead, questioning neighbors and anyone who might have seen Lisa that night. But the trail seemed to run cold. It was as if Lisa had vanished in plain sight, and nobody could understand how this could happen in such a close-knit community. Investigators scoured the town, re-interviewing witnesses, retracing Lisa's steps, and looking for any clue that might lead them to her killer. The police were under intense pressure, and rumors began to swirl. Parents were terrified. I mean, if this could happen to Lisa, could their children be next? The search for answers brought them back to Lisa's neighborhood. Witnesses mentioned a few houses Lisa had stopped by that night, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, one house stood out, one on East Scott Street, just a few doors down from Lisa's home. The man who lived there had once been friendly with Lisa, but now investigators began to take a closer look at him. His name kept coming up in interviews, but nothing solid seemed to tie him to the crime. Yet, the more they dug, the more suspicious the situation became. This man had been home alone on Halloween, claiming he didn't see Lisa that night. But as detectives pushed harder, inconsistencies in his story started to surface, and it wasn't long before their suspicions led to a search warrant where they made a chilling discovery, something that would begin to unravel the mystery of Lisa French's murder. During their investigation, police discovered a letter written by the man, a letter never intended to be sent, but one that held dark confessions. In it, he described in horrific detail how he had lured Lisa into his home on Halloween night. He admitted to assaulting her and, in a panic, killing her when she started to scream. Her death was no accident. It was the result of a calculated act of violence committed by someone she knew, someone her family had trusted. The man was named Gerald Turner, a neighbor who had once been friendly with Lisa and her family. No one could believe it. Turner had seemed just like another man in the neighborhood, a familiar face who would never have raised suspicion. But beneath that mask was a predator. Turner had killed Lisa and discarded her body in a field, hoping his secret would never be discovered. Turner was arrested in 1974 and charged with Lisa's murder. The town, already reeling from the loss, was further shocked by the betrayal. A neighbor, someone they had all trusted, had committed the unthinkable. During the trial, the details of Turner's letter and the forensic evidence made the case clear. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 38 years in prison. However, his release on parole after serving just 17 years caused outrage across the state, and many fought to keep him from ever walking free again. Though justice was served, the scars left by Lisa's murder have never fully healed. Her death changed the way the town viewed Halloween, turning what was once a night of carefree fun into a somber reminder of the dangers that can lurk behind any door. The tragic story of Lisa French is a stark reminder that real horrors of Halloween aren't always found in ghost stories or haunted houses. They can be much, much closer than we'd ever imagine. Lisa's life was taken by someone who wore no mask, but whose monstrous intent was hidden in plain sight. Her memory continues to haunt the town of Fond du Lac, where her story serves as a chilling warning for every family who trusts that Halloween will always be safe. Halloween is a night when the unexpected often feels like part of the fun. Costumes, laughter, and spooky surprises. In 2008, one young woman embraced that energy, attending a lively Halloween party with her neighbors and friends. The night began with laughter and celebration, but by the following days, everything had changed. The events that unfolded would leave her community shocked, her family heartbroken, and the case still shrouded in mystery. This is the story of Arpana Jinaga, whose fate after Halloween night remains a haunting puzzle. It was October 31st, 2008, and the Valley View apartments in Redmond, Washington were buzzing with activity. Arpana Jinaga, a 24-year-old software engineer, was among those celebrating. She had moved to the area recently for a job and was known for her intelligence and warm spirit. She was eager to make new friends and had a passion for bringing people together, which is why she hosted a Halloween party that night in her apartment. The party, a lively affair spread across multiple units in the complex, was filled with music, drinks, and guests in costume. Arpana, as one of the hosts, was seen laughing and enjoying the night with her friends and neighbors. The evening stretched late into the night, with guests moving between apartments and mingling. By all accounts, the night seemed like a success, and by the early morning hours, the party began to wind down. Arpana's apartment, now quiet, would soon become the center of a mystery that no one could have anticipated. A few days passed, and friends and colleagues began to worry when Arpana stopped responding to calls and texts. It wasn't like her to be out of contact, especially with work obligations looming. Concerned, one of her friends, along with a neighbor from the same apartment complex, decided to check in on her. When they arrived at her apartment on November 3rd, they noticed something strange. Her front door was slightly ajar. Nervous but determined, they cautiously stepped inside. The smell of cleaning chemicals hit them nearly immediately. As they ventured further into the apartment, they saw signs of a disturbance. Furniture out of place, items scattered around. Their concern turned to dread as they approached the bedroom. In a horrifying turn, they found Arpana lying on the floor of her bedroom. She was unresponsive. What they initially thought was a mere case of concern for her well-being quickly turned into something much darker. Authorities arrived on the scene and confirmed that Arpana had been brutally murdered. She had been assaulted, severely beaten, and strangled. The scene inside of the apartment was chaotic. Her killer had taken extreme measures to try to cover their tracks. Motor oil had been poured on her body. Bleach and other cleaning products were used to destroy evidence, and her bed linens had been removed and partially burned in the bathtub. Despite these efforts, investigators did manage to recover DNA samples from the crime scene. These detectives quickly began to search for answers, starting with those who had attended the Halloween party. Given the number of people moving in and out of various apartments that night, the pool of potential suspects was rather large, but the brutal nature of the crime suggested that someone close may have been responsible. One of the primary suspects to emerge was a man named Emmanuel Fair, a man with a criminal record who had attended the Halloween party. Fair wasn't a resident of the complex. but had been invited to the gathering as a guest of another resident. His DNA was found at the scene, and his prior convictions for crimes of a sexual nature made him a focal point of the investigation. However, the case was far from straightforward. DNA evidence from multiple individuals was found in Arpana's apartment, including other party guests and her neighbors. Fair's defense argued that his presence at the party explained the DNA, and that it didn't necessarily prove he had been involved in the murder. Fair's lawyers also emphasized the fact that other attendees had acted suspiciously, including a neighbor who was later found to have scratches on his face and hands, though this neighbor claimed that they were from a motorcycle accident. Despite these uncertainties, Emmanuel Fair was charged with Arpana's murder in 2010, but the trial process was lengthy. Fair spent nearly 8 years in jail awaiting trial, facing numerous delays in the proceedings. His first trial, held in 2017, ended in a hung jury, unable to reach a consensus on his guilt. In 2019, Fair went to trial for the second time. Again, the prosecution relied heavily on the DNA evidence found at the scene, while the defense pushed back, pointing to the lack of any direct link between Fair and the murder itself. The defense also argued that multiple unknown DNA samples found at the scene had never been fully explained. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered a verdict of not guilty. Fair was acquitted and released, leaving the case unsolved. While Fair's acquittal closed one chapter of the investigation, it left many unanswered questions about who was truly responsible for Arpana's death. To this day, the murder of Arpana Jinaga remains unsolved. Investigators have continued to search for answers, but the complexity of the crime scene, the multiple DNA profiles, and the failure to tie any one individual to the murder have made the case exceedingly difficult to close. For Arpana's family, friends, and the Redmond community, her murder is a chilling reminder of the darkness that can sometimes hide behind seemingly ordinary nights of celebration. Despite years of investigation and legal proceedings, the question still lingers. Who killed Arpana Jinaga, and why? This case remains open, a haunting unsolved mystery that continues to frustrate investigators and haunt the lives of all those who knew Arpana. I'd like to take a moment to thank you for tuning into this episode and spending your time with us as we uncovered these chilling Halloween mysteries. And if you enjoyed today's content and would like to support the channel even further, our Patreon is the perfect way to do so. Not only does it help us continue bringing you more spine-tingling stories, but you'll also get access to exclusive content, early content, and so much more. You can find us at patreon.com/Malevolent Mischief. We appreciate every single viewer and listener that supports us. It means the world. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next upload. Until then, and like always, I hope to catch you on the next one.